Andy grew up in Cleveland and graduated from Harvard. You may know him from his work in the New Yorker Shouts and Murmurs and Talk of the Town, or perhaps his time as host of Stories of the Moth, or, of course, as creator of the Borowitz Report. In September 2022, Simon & Schuster will publish his latest book, Profiles in Ignorance: How Americans' Politicians Got Dumb and Dumber, which I hear he and AJ will be discussing tonight. And he is the first ever winner of the National Press Club's Humor Award and lives with his family in New Hampshire. AJ, of course, is a journalist, lecturer, and human guinea pig who has written 4 best-selling books, including Drop Dead Healthy and The Year of Living Biblically, that blend memoir, science, humor, and a dash of self-help. A contributor to NPR, the New York Times, and Esquire, Jacobs lives in New York City with his family and was once the answer to One Down in the New York Times crossword puzzle. AJ's book, The Puzzler, is a rollicking journey to understand the enduring power of puzzles, why we love them, what they do to our brains, and how they can improve our world. Booklist called it ridiculously entertaining, and Library Journal said it's a must read. So, of course, RJ Julia is thrilled and grateful to have AJ and Andy here today. I am going to go ahead and let them get started, and I will be back later for Q&A. So be sure to get your questions in, and I will see y'all later.
Thank you, Abby. That was so nice. Such a nice introduction. AJ, how are you doing? How are you doing, sir?
I am good. I'm excited because my book is out, but people are getting this is historic because your book doesn't come out till September. And this is your very first book event for Profiles in Ignorance. So it's like a sneak peek. It's very exciting.
History being made. Now, I should, full disclosure, you and I are friends. We've known each other a long time. But I have also, I read your book in before it was published, and I absolutely loved it. And when I read it, I said, this is all about puzzles, and I love your book, and it's very funny and very informative, even though I am not a puzzler. I had no interest really in doing puzzles. I mean, I played some Scrabble and done a crossword puzzle or two, but I'm just not a puzzle person. However, since reading your book, and I don't think it's entirely because of your book, but it's related, I've become addicted to Wordle. I believe I'm one of the few Americans who have discovered this niche game. Are you like Wordle too, right?
I am a fan. I'm not addicted to it like I am addicted to the spelling bee and wake up in the middle of the night to do, but I like it. What's your first word? What's your opening word?
Well, my son and I do Wordle. We're like, transcontinental Wordle pals. So it's a way to actually bond with your child other than just by sending them direct deposit periodically. It's a good way to stay in touch. And so he games Wordle much more than I do. Like he will find, he does Wordle Bot. Are you familiar with Wordle Bot?
No, what's that one?
Wordle Bot is, well, it's an app that I guess the Times provides, which is, it tells you, it runs your score, your moves, your daily moves through their algorithm. It tells you what percentage of your result was due to luck and what was due to skill.
Oh, interesting.
For people who really want to drill down. My son is also into fantasy football, so that explains that obsession with statistics. But we've had a bunch of different opening word gambits. We've had a Jew. We've had
classic.
There was one that I don't even believe is a word. This word called rote, which is R-O-A-T-E, which I guess means the same thing as R-O-T-E, but I mean that's not really even a word as far as I'm concerned. Crane was another one, and now the new Wordle du jour that all the kids are playing is Delt. So what?
Oh, D-E-A-L-T.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
What is your word?
I'm not proud of it. I'm filled with shame every time I type it because I read an article that an artificial intelligence analyzed it, and that the best opening word is soar, S-O-A-R, A-R-E, also not a real word. It means a young hawk, so allegedly a real word. But I hate myself for doing it, and I admire people who are, just go on a whim. And I think that's more sporting. Like one day it's robot, one day it's tulip. That's I think a better way.
Well, you want to get some vowels in there. I mean, the first time I played Wordle, I actually think we should spend the entire hour reviewing my various moves on Wordle. It'd be fascinating to the audience.
Riveting.
The first time I just took a wild guess and said elbow. I just said elbow because it had 2 vowels in it. And I wound up getting Wordle in maybe 4 or 5 moves. So that's not terrible. But with Delt, I've got to say this, and this is highly luck driven, I'm sure. I've used Delt the last 2 days. I've gotten Wordle on guess number 2 days in a row.
So very impressed. I hope you tweeted that out too, so you can be admired by millions. I didn't.
So now I've got to say I haven't become a total convert to puzzles, but I do see their appeal. And I mean, I can certainly see, like, during the pandemic, puzzles became enormous. So that was kind of actually well-timed, because you'd been working on this book for a few years. And actually, it makes me wonder whether you might have had some role in starting the pandemic, because the timeline is suspicious.
It is suspicious.
When did you start working on this book, and when did it supposedly escape from a lab in Wuhan? I just want to. I'm being like Rand Paul to your Dr. Fauci right now.
No, listen, like, it is, it's reasonable. It is too convenient. I started working on it about 3 or 4 months before the pandemic.
Okay.
And then the pandemic came.
No further questions.
Okay, so should we end it there?
No. Okay, so 3 or 4 months supposedly before the pandemic, and
then the pandemic came, and puzzles had already been big, but then it was like you couldn't buy a puzzle online. Jigsaw puzzles were like hand sanitizer and toilet paper. They were like one of the staples, and so that was, it was interesting. It was definitely a boost in puzzling. I will tell you, on the other hand, the bad timing was Wordle, because we had closed the book 2 months. No. I had closed it about 2 weeks before Wordle exploded, and finally, after just never-ending Wordle mania, I begged my publisher. I said, "Can we just open the book? I feel we have to get Wordle in." So, and they're like, "Okay." We opened it up, and I got the word Wordle in. So literally, the only reference is, it says, "At night I do the New York Times crossword puzzle and Wordle." So So if people ask me, so it, does it have Wordle? Sure, Wordle is in there. Amazing. Wordle.
You do not miss a trick, AJ Jacobs. But as you know,
I'm very honest. It's not an in-depth. It's not in-depth.
But filling in one word can win a whole game, as you know.
There you go.
So it's in a way very emblematic of your quest.
Thank you.
Now, interestingly, and as Abby was running down your bestsellers, I came to this conclusion about this book, which is kind of interesting, at least to me. I hope it is to you. You work in this genre that you kind of mastered, and you're sort of the king of, which is this kind of immersive journalism, where you'll go on one man's humble quest, like you'll read the entire encyclopedia, and you'll spend a year being literally obeying the Bible, as in the year of living biblically. And I remember we lived in the same neighborhood when you were doing Drop Dead Healthy, and you were on a quest to have bodily perfection. I would see you at Crunch, the gym. I would say maybe falling somewhat short of your quest, but at least trying to do that.
That's the important thing.
That's the important thing. And then you wrote your book about the human family tree and how we're all related. One thing that I think is kind of different about this book is they're all high concept books, but the other ones, you found something that interested you, and you went out and then you pursued it, and you took us all on a really fun ride, and you learned a lot, and you entertained us a lot. But puzzles actually aren't something that you really had to look outside of yourself to find. You've actually been a puzzle lover pretty much your whole life, right? So this is a little bit more personal in some ways.
It's true. Yeah, I grew up doing crosswords and mazes. And actually, this book had a weird origin because I spent I don't know if we went out to lunch during this time, but I had contracted to write a book on called Fact Checking My Life. And it was in response to the truth crisis, the epistemic crisis of fake news and what do we know. So I was going to try to figure out, how do I know that the world is round? How do I know that my wife loves me? She says she does. How do I know that the New York Times is more accurate than Newsmax? And I actually think it's an interesting idea still, but I was miserable. I was just miserable. And I was worried that I would spin into insanity. And my my agent said, well, why don't you, he knew I love puzzles. So he said, why don't you actually do something that you love? And I was like, you know what, that is not, if I could spend 2.5 years doing puzzles, talking to eccentric puzzle people, and writing a book with puzzles, that's not a bad deal. So but speaking of origins, let me throw it back to you, since this is a joint event.
Okay.
Tell me, because Profiles in Ignorance, hilarious. I love it. It's brilliant. It's a little different than your other books in that it's sort of more, I don't know how you do, more nonfiction. It's like almost a hilarious look, but accurate look at history. So how did that book come about?
Well, it was I think a little bit related to the pandemic that you started. We lived in New York City, actually not far from you, as you know. Like we lived just a few blocks apart. And when the pandemic hit, we moved to New Hampshire, partially because my wife used to work around here, and we were looking for a place where we could send our daughter to school, where they might even be able to go to school in person rather than remotely, which worked out. But obviously spending a lot of time isolating, and when you isolate, you go down interesting paths. You might maybe start baking or start puzzling or whatever. And one day out of the blue, my daughter said to me, and she's around 9 or 10 at the time. She said, has there ever been a president of the United States in the White House who didn't have a wife? That's kind of a puzzle question. Do you know the answer to that question, AJ?
James Buchanan.
Yes.
Bachelor president.
James Buchanan. And so I started doing some research about James Buchanan. And with the exception of a recent White House occupant, he for a long time was considered the worst president of the United States because, among other things, he really helped sort of speed along that start of the Civil War by not he thought that the Dred Scott decision was going to pretty much clear the whole thing up. Now it's going to be fine. He actually, when he was inaugurated, he said, he kind of teased the audience and said, in a few days, the Supreme Court is going to come up with an awesome decision that's going to solve everything. So terrible president. Yeah, terrible president. And it made me think a little bit about bad politicians. And I started thinking about recent politicians who've been terrible. Obviously, Donald Trump, a lot of historians believe, was a worse president than James Buchanan. But I started thinking about this concept of knowledge and ignorance, a little bit related to what you were discussing, AJ, about how much we know. And one of the problems that we've had in recent years, I mean, it's very typical to say we have stupid politicians. That's kind of an old saw, but I realized that in the last 50 years, politicians have actually known less and less. They've known less geography. They don't know how to spell. They don't know whether Frederick Douglass is alive or dead. Things like that I really think a president should know. And so, kind of like doing a puzzle, I started just assembling all these pieces. I didn't go in with a theory that I was going to try to then hammer home. I decided just to research the last 50 years of political life in America. And what I found in writing this book was that I was correct. Of course, I believe I'm correct. Our politicians have gotten stupider. A lot of it's because we have TV now, and it's more important for a politician to be good on TV than to know stuff. Ronald Reagan was a great example of that. Really good on TV, knew almost nothing, could not divide 45 by 9, for example, which I think is
I
something.
think I got that. Okay.
I think
yeah.
you got that. You're on top of that. So, what's interesting is this book is a departure for me. It's sort of, the Borowitz report, every day I just make stuff up. It's a complete, I'm looking at reality and then coming up with an alternative reality. This book, sadly, is reality. Everything in it is true. But I actually think the truth is much funnier than stuff I can make up. That the actual stuff that politicians have done and have said, those things are terrifying, but they're also hilarious. It's definitely a laugh cry experience. And I sort of harken back to this thing that Will Rogers, who was a great American political humorist of the early part of the 20th century, said. He said, there's no trick to being a humorist when you have the whole government working for you. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's like, all I had to do was really immerse myself in our recent history, and I could come up with a lot of hilarious stuff really through no effort of my own. I'm really just the stuff that these guys came up with, and women, of course. There were some great female contributors as well.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And you dig up amazing stuff. But who was it who had a C average, but then his library said, well, no, if you adjust it for inflation, it's really a B plus? Was that FDR?
That was, yeah. Now FDR. Now this was a kind of a point. And by the way, just for those listening, I don't include FDR as one of our ignorant presidents. He was actually extremely knowledgeable, but he wasn't a good student. A lot of really good presidents haven't been good students. There's a difference. That's, it's like, again, to harken back to puzzles, school is kind of a game. If you figure out how to game school, you can do well at it. But we've had a lot of presidents who have been C students, like FDR was a C student, and the FDR Foundation goes to great lengths to say that due to grade inflation, his C's would be considered high B's by today's standards. So I love that they're like sort of
that is
a little bit.
So do my B's in college and high school, can they get inflated? I'm gonna start saying I was an A student.
I think you were Phi Beta Kappa now.
Thank you.
By that. But no, I mean, it's to me, the big difference between somebody like FDR and another C student, Dan Quayle, who was also a C student at DePauw University, the big difference is intellectual curiosity. You don't have to be a great student to be president, but you've got to be interested in stuff, because to solve problems, like to solve a puzzle, you have to be curious. And that's the big problem. George W. Bush was famously not curious. I mean, he was just on the verge of invading Iraq, and he had a meeting with some Iraqi experts, and they were explaining Sunnis and Shiites to him, which he had never heard about before. This is like just weeks until the invasion. And he heard about Sunnis and Shiites, and he said, but I thought the Iraqis were Muslims. So, I mean, that's a problem. Like he did not do his reading. So yeah, it's a little bit sobering, but also
but very, very funny. So you will laugh as you become more and more depressed. But yeah, it is. Curiosity, by the way, is sort of the theme of my book, because
absolutely,
I love that's curiosity and gratitude are my two favorite emotions. But this, I did want to segue quickly to the fact, because I think this was billed as humor and puzzles, and I wanted to talk a little about the Venn diagram of humor and puzzles.
Oh wow!
You didn't see that coming in the email I sent you?
No, that's it. I'm just saying, I'm just marveling at your segue ability. It's good.
Well, can I also just say one other thing that's moderately related, which is the favorite joke of mine in my book was written by Andy Borowitz. So I just want to thank you. And it is, I'm talking about the origin of jigsaw puzzles. And jigsaw puzzles were invented by a John Spilsbury, who was a Brit in the 1700s, and they were a geography aid. He took maps, pasted them on on a wooden platform, and then he carved up the maps and would give them to noble children to learn geography. And when Andy read it, he put in the margin, he said, I believe something like, the most benign case ever of a Brit carving up a map. And I said, that is so good. Can I please use it? And yes.
Well, I have,
thank you.
Thank you. And, there you go with your gratitude, just using that gratitude muscle again. But yeah, I mean, one of my favorite examples of, this is one of the problems actually with people thinking they're good at puzzles, which is that sometimes people will think, I'm great at a puzzle at my desk, and so that translates to an equivalent mastery in the real world. And so the British, for example, this guy, his name was Radcliffe, was the genius who decided to partition India and Pakistan. And so that was basically a very expedient decision because the British had to get out of India, and they thought, well, the solution is we'll draw this line, and we'll have, the Muslims live in one part, and we'll have the Hindus live in the other part. It'll all be great. And they had this guy Radcliffe draw the line. The only problem with that was that Radcliffe had never actually visited India. He had never been anywhere near it. And partition resulted in the deaths of many, 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 many people. So it's a problem. It's a problem of overconfidence when people think they're great. And I guess it's a concern I have about people who are really great with computers and virtual reality and, artificial intelligence and all this stuff, thinking that they can engineer a better world when you still do need to have one foot in the real world, right? It's kind of important.
It is, absolutely. Well, I wanted to
have the Venn diagram.
segue back. I'm segueing back from your partitioning back to jokes and puzzles, because one of our mutual friends, Mike Reese, who was a long time, he is a longtime writer for The Simpsons, and he is a huge puzzler. He says that at The Simpsons, they don't start writing until they've done a couple hours of puzzles. So, but one thing he said, which I liked, is he said that jokes and puzzles are they're cousins. They're very close cousins. And he says that often a joke is missing something, and the listener, has to fill it in. And that's where the humor is. So if you spell it all out, that's not so funny. And he gives an example of a skeleton walks into a bar and says, I'd like a mug of beer and a mop. And then it's not laugh out loud funny, but it's like, cute. And it took me about, 4 or 5 seconds. I'm like, oh, right, because it goes through and then you have to mop it up. So the puzzle is to figure out why the mop. And once you realize it, you get that aha moment, you get that surprise and delight, and hopefully some laughter. So that was Mike, and I think he's onto something. I like it.
Well, he is. I go through this when I'm writing the Borowitz report, because to me, there are a lot of different, when you're writing a daily column, you rely on some of the same techniques or devices over and over again. You have to. But a lot of times, like a joke will be, the headline will really be that I'm missing one key piece of information that I'm hoping the audience will connect, and that the joy is going to be them, as you said, them having that eureka or aha moment of like, oh, I get it. And so they're active participants in it. And one problem I sometimes have, the New Yorker is a publication that's known for humor, but their main thing is facts, right? Like they're really into fact checking, and they're really into reporting, and they win all kinds of Pulitzer Prizes. So sometimes when I'm working with kind of newsy people on the editorial side, and I'm doing a column that's making fun of something in the news, and I'm leaving out a key piece of information because that's the joke, they'll want to say something like, shouldn't we put like a little thing from the Washington Post before your article so people will know what it is that you're riffing on here? And it's like, well, yes, we want to absolutely kill the enjoyment of what's to follow. We'll do that. but I'm nicer about it than that. But Mike is absolutely right. It's you're, you know, the audience is like enjoying decoding the puzzle
Right.
when they find a laugh. So did you study, like, is there a serotonin rush when people, you know, get the right wordle or the right answer to a New York Times?
Yeah, well, it's not, it's dopamine. That's the one.
Dopamine.
Everyone loves dopamine. So yes, that is the aha moment, is linked to dopamine. So at the punchline of a joke or at solving the puzzle, you get that dopamine rush. And yeah, I talk to scientists who say hardwired into, we love the dopamine rush. And so originally it was to find food, of course, but now it has expanded to you making a Ted Cruz joke, and you get that same dopamine rush. But it's not, yeah, I think that is why puzzles are across every culture, and even across species. You could consider the chimp getting the termites out of the mound with a stick. That's a puzzle, but it's all because you're wired to try to find solutions and get that dopamine rush.
And something like I don't do the New York Times crossword puzzle, but I've done a few of them, but something like that really does combine puzzles and humor, because a lot of times the clue is kind of a pun, right? Or wordplay. And it's like, you think it's one thing and you have that laugh of like, oh, that's not what they meant. They meant
right.
that. Are there some examples of that that are like your favorites? I don't want to put you on the spot. But.
Oh, that's a good one. I did have some. Well, I should just first say thank you to Stephen Sondheim, because he had weirdly had a lot to do with puns and wordplay being a bigger part of crosswords, because crosswords have sort of evolved. And in the beginning, they were much more trivia based. So what is what is the river in Bulgaria? And that's not as fun. And Stephen Sondheim wrote an article for New York Magazine many years ago called "What is a four-letter word for East Indian betel nut, and who cares?" And his point was he preferred British crosswords, which are much more about tricky wordplay, anagrams, puns, things like that. And you've seen it creep into American crosswords. And I'm trying to think of, one of the people I interviewed, if you ask him, what is your favorite clue you've ever written, he gleefully responds, fuck off. And the joke is, it's faux cough is the clue, but it allows him to say fuck off. And faux cough, F-A-U-X C-O-U-G-H, the answer is ahem. Like that's a faux
cough.
Oh,
nice.
Ahem.
So a faux cough.
But he says it, yeah, like, what's your favorite clue? Fuck off. So there you go. There's some wordplay. I have about 3 minutes of slides of my favorite funny or humor adjacent puzzles. And then maybe we can answer any questions. Yeah. All right, let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Yeah, share screen. That's not bad. Oh, that's not it. Oh, wow. All right, you get to see some interesting stuff. Okay, and all right, here are my humor adjacent puzzles. This one actually was the cover of my book, and I put it on Facebook proudly saying, look at this. It did not go well, because crossword puzzle people are lovely, but they are not big on mistakes. They're not forgiving of mistakes. And this is not a real crossword puzzle. It has 2-letter words. It's not symmetrical. It breaks all the rules. In fact, there's a Twitter feed called Not a Crossword Puzzle, and it is making fun of the poor artists who tried to create crossword puzzle. So I begged my editor, it's like, we got to switch it. Is it too late? And we got this. So thank God we avoided the wrath of the crossword community. This is the opening anecdote of the book is about, I've been a crossword fan all my life, and about a few years ago, like maybe 7 years ago now, I was the answer to one down in the New York Times crossword puzzle, A.J. Blank, author of The Know-It-All. And of course, I thought this was the highlight of my life. My wife getting married, that was pretty good. This was the Holy Grail.
Sure.
Then my brother-in-law pointed out, correct, he emailed me and congratulated me. He did congratulate, but then he pointed out that I appeared in the Saturday New York Times crossword puzzle. And if you know the crossword puzzles, they start out pretty easy on Monday, and by Saturday, they're incredibly hard, and all the answers are totally obscure. So his point was, this is not a compliment. This is proof that no one knows who you are, and that like you're the most obscure person. So then I was crushed. But the happy ending is I told that story on a podcast, and it happened that one of the crossword makers was listening, and he rescued me and put me in a Tuesday puzzle, which is not Monday.
Wow.
Yes, Tuesday.
Upgrade.
Huge. And I didn't belong there. He was very clear I didn't belong. He said I had to make the crossing words like TV guide crossword puzzle easy. Like he's like, because that's where Lady Gaga, like Gaga you see in that kind of puzzle.
Right. Well,
this is one of my favorite puzzles. It appeared in the Baltimore Sun about a year ago, and it was a spot the difference puzzle. Can you spot 10 differences between the top and bottom? Unfortunately, they had to run a correction the next day because, and it says the images are mistakenly the same images, not in fact different. So that it's heartbreaking, but it is kind of delightful. I mean, I feel for the hundreds of hours of human labor spent looking for different, but I just also think it in my darker periods, I think it's a nice metaphor for life. Like
it's totally. That's not a metaphor for life. That actually is life right there. That's what it is. Trying to find things that don't exist. Yes.
This one, I guess it's a little blurry, but I went to Barnes and Noble a couple of months ago, and it was banned. They were celebrating banned books, and Where's Waldo was on there. And I looked it up, and according to the American Library Association, Where's Waldo is one of the most banned books. And I was like, why? And apparently, one reason is that you can see this beach scene, this woman in the green bikini, you can see her side boob. And that was apparently enough to cause some controversy in the more conservative areas of our country. So they banned it. Here you see the censored version. This one, I don't know if this is funny, but I thought it was interesting. I went to the headquarters of the CIA. I guess the humor is that this is a very famous puzzle.
Right.
It is a sculpture, 30 years old, created by a sculptor and a cryptologist. And it's at the headquarters of the CIA, and it's a secret code that no one has cracked in 30 years, including the CIA, whose job is to crack the code. So I went there, and it was fascinating. There are thousands of people obsessed with this, and they had all sorts of secret instructions for me about what to look for in the puzzle. But we did not, not to spoil that chapter, but we did not end up cracking it, but we had a good time trying. Well, this one was one of my other favorite adventures. I went to Spain with my wife and two of my sons, and we represented the United States of America in the World Jigsaw Puzzle Championship. My kids were not happy about it. They said they would only do it if they didn't have to wear a uniform. And as you can see, I then made them wear a uniform. It's a Jigsaw American flag. But we were just a disaster. I apologize to my fellow Americans. We came in second to last, because I'm actually not, jigsaws were my least favorite type of puzzle. I was kind of snooty about them. I've come to become a convert. I love them now. But we were definitely not people who trained for years, hours a day, like the other competitors. This one I'll skip over. This one I just want to do as a tribute to my dad, because my dad is he's got a puzzly mind, a tricky mind, and he suggested that instead of page numbers, every page number should actually be a puzzle, and the answer to that puzzle would be that page number, which was lovely. I proposed it to the publisher, who thought it sounded like a lot of work and very expensive. So I did convince them to do one. So my father, his mark is clear in this book, because there's page 28 on the left, but page 29 is the puzzle is the greatest number of pieces that you can create if you slice a pie with 7 cuts. And the answer is 29. So thank you to my dad. And then finally, this one is maybe not funny, but a delight. I'm very excited about this, because when I was a kid, one of my favorite books was Masquerade. Did you ever read that, Andy?
No.
It was a British book, an illustrated book, and it had in the illustrations clues to a hidden treasure, like a real golden rabbit. And it caused a mania. It caused thousands of Brits and Americans to go crazy. They were digging up parks, other people's lawns, to find this treasure. Finally, someone found it. So I love the idea. I didn't want to cause, trespassing and property damage, but I love the idea of hiding a code in the book. So in the book's introduction is a secret code, and it is no purchase necessary. My lawyers want me to say that. The code, the introduction is available for free on the thepuzzlerbook.com website. So go to thepuzzlerbook.com, look at the intro, and find the code using these hints around here. And once you put in the code, it will open up to a wild puzzle hunt, is what it's called, which is like an escape room on bath salts. And it was not written by me, so I feel fine boasting about it. It was these 5 brilliant puzzle makers I met at the MIT Mystery Hunt, which is like a crazy scavenger hunt type event. And so they crafted dozens of puzzles. So throughout the entire month of April, wait, we're in May now. Throughout May, there will be one new puzzle every weekday. And if you solve all the puzzles, by the end of 22 puzzles, you will get access to the speed round. And the team, or person, I should say person, who wins the speed round wins $10,000 of actual US currency. So I am super excited about this. We have about 1,000 people competing right now, but I want more to join, because even if you don't win the 10,000, it is free entertainment. These are wild puzzles, because they're like crosswords, but with a twist, or Sudoku, but in ways you've never thought of them. These people are really brilliant. So Greg Pliska is the man who's headed it up, but there are 4 other great puzzle makers involved. And Greg did original puzzles for my book as well. So that's it. Please join the puzzle hunt, even if you don't buy the book, because it is really cool. And that's the end. That's the end of my presentation.
Oh, very well done. I should add also on a personal note, when you mentioned scavenger hunts, I don't mean to disclose, like I say I'm disclosing something personal, but your wife, Julie, actually has a scavenger hunt business. Like that's her whole thing. Like she does these team building adventures, right? For groups.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And yes, it is Watson Adventures, and it is a lot of fun, and they're either in person or online. And by the way, while we're plugging our spouse's work, your spouse is a brilliant writer. She's written, she wrote a great book about birding, and then her new book, maybe we can put the link in the chat.
Well, yeah, it's a piece, a long form piece of journalism. My wife is the opposite of me. She works to create nonfiction journalism, original nonfiction journalism, and she so that means she spends long hours. But you know, AJ, you do this too. It's like you have to travel, you have to spend long hours on the phone talking to people. It's really hard work. When I wrote Profiles in Ignorance, I basically got a lot of old books and found out idiotic things that Dan Quayle said. It's a little bit, I never actually spoke to Dan Quayle, which would have been exhausting. But yes, she wrote a piece for this wonderful institution in Texas called the Texas Observer, which is a great organ of investigative journalism. And it's the opposite of what I do. It's very, very serious. It's a very tragic story about a mother whose daughter was murdered. But I urge everyone to read it. Her name is Olivia Gentile, Gentile, and check it out. So now we've done some product placement for our marriages, which is good. That can only be a good thing. I think I see Abby reappearing to ask us some questions.
All right, wait, I just put that, oh wait, I'm putting it to everyone. So yes, this, the topic is humor. This is not particularly humorous or article, but it is awesome.
It's wonderful, yeah.
Nonetheless. All right, so yeah, Abby.
All right, well, first of all, so your dad is Arnie, right?
Is he causing trouble?
He says, thanks, AJ, about page 29. So I just wanted you to know that he responded.
Well, thank you, Dad, for the idea.
So we have some questions from the audience. AJ, what is your average time to solve the New York Times mini crossword? Are you always at the top of your leaderboard?
That is a nice question. I actually don't do the mini. I do the regular. My sons do the mini. I would like to know, wait, this is whoever it is. I want to hear yours, your time. I did enter the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament a couple of weeks ago, and I decided I'm more of a savorer. I like to savor the puzzles and not rush through them. It's like, speed eating, like when you eat 100 Nathan's hot dogs. Is that really pleasant? No. Yeah. So that's my excuse for not being super fast.
We have one here for Andy. If politicians are getting dumber and dumber, does that mean voters are also getting dumber and dumber? What are your thoughts?
It's funny. I went into the book with that kind of I would say it's a somewhat elitist point of view that maybe voters were getting too dumb. And don't get me wrong, I am a total elitist. I consider myself the Ted Nugent of elitism. So I'm not going to abandon that. But I actually think in politics, there's something called trickle-down ignorance, where our politicians lower the bar for us. And actually, voters are probably smarter than a lot of the people we wind up electing. So I don't necessarily, I think, people say, oh, if we fixed our education system, then we'd have smart politicians. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that the solution, honestly, is that we, as individuals, rather than just bemoaning the stupidity of our politicians, that we really do the hard work on the ground to elect better ones, because that's within our power. That's the one thing that people like Stacey Abrams have shown. That if instead of just watching CNN and MSNBC and complaining and being online all the time, all things I'm guilty of, by the way, if we really work to make everybody from the people on the school board all the way to the president of the United States less ignorant, then we'd lift everybody up. So it's really not, I don't blame the voters, interesting enough. Sure, we have dumb voters, a lot of dumb people, but we have a lot of smart people too.
So fair, a mix then.
Yeah.
AJ, this person wants to know if you loved puzzles when you were a kid. This particular viewer says they often chose puzzle related items than other kinds of toys in their own youth. So
I definitely was a huge puzzle nerd as a kid and remain so. And I loved Games Magazine, I don't know, which still exists. I loved making pencil mazes. I would make huge pencil mazes the size of our living room floor. And I came from a family of puzzlers. So my mom and dad, hi Dad, now we know you saw, he and my mom had a lovely story. My dad was stationed in Korea after the Korean War as a lawyer, and he and my mom would solve the crossword puzzle together, but they would each solve a clue and mail it back and forth between Korea and the United States, where my mom was, which is the least efficient solving, I think, of a crossword puzzle ever. Like back then, the mail must have taken like 4 months. So, but still very romantic. So thank them. I thank them for instilling the puzzle gene in me.
I love that. It's like, it's a real investment too, going back and forth. So that's great. Andy, this person wants to know what your daily deadline is. They are very impressed with how quickly you skewer the latest news.
Well, thank you. That's really nice. I don't have a daily deadline. I'm a little bit, the one way in which I'm like an actual journalist, I must specify this may be the only way, is that I'm very dependent on what's happening in the world. So if something happens that's prominent, like this week, there seemed to be something going on at the Supreme Court that happened. I wanted to jump on that pretty quickly because I knew it would be front of mind for everybody. But my wife, who's an actual journalist, talks about how when she used to work for a newspaper not far from here in Vermont, and there are those slow news days where you would just like go down to town hall and see what was going on at the town meeting. And I have those days too. And on those days, I write about Rand Paul and Ted Cruz because, you know, it's like a sitcom or the Commedia dell'arte or anything. You have to have your clown characters that you go back to again and again. And on a day when things are slow, I do something about Dr. Fauci and Rand Paul, just because to me, that's a comic situation that's kind of eternal, even if something's not going on in the real world.
True. This one is interesting as well. So don't people seem to be pulled toward electing the candidate who embodies the quote zeitgeist of their generations? This person is thinking of JFK and DJT specifically. What do you think?
Well, that is a very, very serious question. And it used a very fancy word like zeitgeist, which I'm very impressed by. Well, you know, JFK and Donald Trump have more in common than we think because they're both really good on TV, you know? So I think that to me is the more the through line. Whoever's really good on TV has a real leg up because I know TV seems like, that's an antiquated invention, like everything is now online and everything. It's still visual though. We're still living in a visual world. And that to me was changed. The big difference between JFK and Donald Trump, besides how knowledgeable they were, is that JFK had phenomenal hair. And I think that actually was very influential on politics for a long time. People with good hair get elected. And that goes, if you look at like John Edwards, famously spent hundreds of dollars on his hair. Rod Blagojevich, amazing kind of helmet of hair. Ronald Reagan, his hair was like lacquered to a high gloss. You could see yourself in it. And it goes all the way to Rick Perry. You know, Rick Perry had three things. He had his hair, he had his teeth, and I can't remember what the third was. But he does, you know, it's like, so Donald Trump, in a way, I'm mystified by this. He is such a good TV performer. He overcame the fact that he has the worst hair ever. And that is like, it's going to require like a political scientist beyond my capability to explain how he did that.
That is interesting. And can I just hop in on two things? One, I agree with Andy, like good hair has been a huge political boom. And what makes me sad about modern politics is I want more ugly politicians. I think that, you know, would Lincoln, some people find Lincoln attractive. I'm not criticizing his looks, but in a traditional GQ type look, he does not have the, maybe we should have blind, like, you know, politicians should be behind a screen, like how you audition for a symphony, so you can't see them.
Well, you make a really good point, AJ, and also like related to the Lincoln thing. You know, in 2000, one of the big sort of poll results that we heard was that more people wanted to have a beer with George W. Bush than with Al Gore. And I don't really, if you look at our best presidents, none of those guys are people that you'd want to have a beer with. Like Abraham Lincoln would probably get extremely morose. Like you just don't want to have a beer with Honest Abe Lincoln. And, you know, the other thing about the beer quiz, which I find fascinating, is we've now come to, it's like very baked into our politics, sort of the way TV is. Like we talk about who do you want to have a beer with? That poll was not created by a polling organization. It was not created by Gallup or Harris. You know who created it? the marketing team behind Sam Adams Beer.
Really?
So that's how we're choosing our presidents now. Sam Adams Beer. I mean, that, and if we want to choose our politicians according to a beer, would it be Sam Adams? I mean, that's my question. What
Well, that's a
about
very
Anchor
elitist beer. That's
I-
like, who would you rather have a Sauvignon Blanc with?
Well,
Like,
exactly.
yeah,
It's
a
just the
little
wrong
fancy.
beer. And in any event, I do not want George W. Bush, who had a DUI, having a beer with anybody. I just don't want that. So it's like anyway, we're strained, but I agree with AJ. Like the visual component, the hair. Let's have some real ugly, well-informed people running the country. I'd be all
Right.
for that.
Agree.
Asking the real questions.
Yeah.
AJ, here's one. This person would like to know if you have a theory about why they like virtually all puzzles except for word searches and spot the difference.
That is interesting. They don't like the
Very
visual
specific.
puzzles. I actually have a whole chapter on visual puzzles, and I am a fan. I have to say, I became a fan. I was never a huge Where's Waldo. First of all, when I found out it was a banned book, I was very excited. And secondly, I guess to me, there are two things that I love about. First, just the history. I loved researching the history of Where's Waldo, because Where's Waldo's great grandfather was Bruegel. Is that how you pronounce it? He was a Renaissance painter who hid all sorts of wonderful
Bruegel.
things. Bruegel,
Bruegel.
there you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
You have an excellent accent. So I love the history, but I also, a lot of my book is about trying to see what life lessons puzzles can teach me. And one of the life lessons that I think visuals, spot the difference type lessons can teach you is look closely and notice. I think in my book on gratitude, I talked a lot about how we are not very good at noticing. We get very bored very quickly. We're looking at our phones, and it's hard to appreciate. It's hard to have gratitude unless you're noticing. So, yeah, I try to remind myself, stop looking at the phone, look around. I'm now looking out at a building across the street, which has all these interesting, weird, fake Greek designs on it, and it's quite lovely. It's interesting to look at. So yeah, that I say, try to treat the world like a big Where's Waldo spread and look for all the interesting things in it. I don't know if that's going to convert you to spot the difference or not, but that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, that is very great advice, though. I love that.
Thank you, Abby.
Yeah. When you do jigsaw puzzles, do you cheat? And by cheat, this person means, do you keep the cover of the box to refer to while you're putting the puzzle together?
I like that question. And I am not a cheater. I find it much more fun to try to do it without them, because
So
then
hard.
it's more like a puzzle. It's more like a puzzle. And I have a section on this famously difficult puzzle company called Stave. They are based in Vermont, right? I visited Andy when I went to go see them, because he lives in New Hampshire, but they are the fanciest jigsaw. They are hand carved wooden puzzles that cost hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. Bill Gates is a fan because he can afford them. And these are so tricky. They never provide an image of the puzzle, so you have to figure it out. But the guy who runs it calls himself Chief Tormentor, and he loves to torture his customers with all sorts of other tricks, pieces that don't even fit in the puzzle, pieces that look like edge pieces but aren't, pieces that are three-dimensional. So yeah, I became a fan of jigsaws partly because of the challenge of not looking at the cover. So I agree. I wouldn't call it cheating. It's a little judgmental, but I prefer the more pure version.
Nice. What was your sense of puzzlers' demographics based on your interactions with them?
Well, I think it's hard to stereotype. I mean, there were puzzlers from everything, from every occupation you can think of. There is, some people say that there are two main types, the word puzzlers and the math and logic puzzle. And it's like cats, you're either a cat person or a dog person. But I happen to love cats and dogs. So I think it's very reductive to say that you have to choose one type of puzzle. I am particularly bad at spatial puzzles like Rubik's Cubes. So those, I guess, I don't enjoy as much. But yeah, I think it's hard to stereotype. I think I am puzzle fluid, and I think that everyone else should be too.
I like that. Unfortunately, we won't have time to get to everyone's questions, but thank you all for your very smart questions and uses of the word zeitgeist. I thought we'd end on this one, and I feel I can put it to both of you. Do you have any life hacks on how to cope? This person says living in a red state, but I think honestly, just in general, 2 years into the pandemic, life hacks on how to cope in these dire times.
Oh, that's a lovely question. Andy,
Well,
what do you got?
I'd like to borrow a little bit from AJ and say, find the things that you love. AJ was miserable working on his book, on that other book, and then he wound up doing puzzles and loved that, and then he got a great book out of it. But he also had a great couple years working on it, and so I feel that way too. I mean, it's like this has been a very tough couple of years for people, and it's not over yet. We still have a lot of the convulsions and the aftershocks, and the virus will still be around, and we're going to have economic issues, but we always have problems. I guess the one thing that I learned from my study of the last 50 years and from writing this book is that history doesn't move in a straight line. So, we had Greek and Rome and the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome. Then we had the Dark Ages, and in a mere number of centuries, we had the Renaissance. So just wait around. Things will get better, and sometimes they're going to get better through nothing that we do. It's just the cycle. So I would just try to maintain some kind of optimism that perhaps it's not all downhill, it's not all going up, it's not all progress either. It's some cycle of both. How's that?
I love it. And my life hack would be one I learned from this book, which is to adopt what I call the puzzler mindset, which is what we talked about of deep curiosity. And I was watching some child psychologists do a webinar, and one of them said, when your child throws a tantrum, don't get furious, get curious. Get curious as to what's going on, what's really happening, how can you prevent it? And I kind of adopted that for everything. Don't get furious, get curious. So if I am talking to someone from the opposite side of the political spectrum, instead of trying to visualize it as a war of words, which is probably not going to convince either one of us, I try to see it as a puzzle or a mystery or an adventure. Why do I believe what I believe? Why does she believe what she believes? Is there any evidence that could sway either one of us? Where do we go from here? Is there any common ground? All these are puzzles that you can work on almost collaboratively, as opposed to trying to bash each other into submission. And I not only think it's a more pleasant conversation, I think that it has more chance of creating something productive in the end. So that would be my life hack: is be curious, treat this people on the opposite side as a puzzle. Like, can we solve it? Maybe we can't, but it's worth trying.
Well, thank you both. This has been just such a bright spot in my week. I wish we could talk longer, but it's been a lovely
We got
hour.
Minnie Driver. You can't talk because Minnie Driver is coming up.
That's right.
So go to Minnie Driver if you want double RJ Julia of fun.
Abby, could you just ask Minnie Driver all the questions that we weren't able to get to? Maybe she'll have some insight about puzzles and James.
Yes,
Buchanan.
and we did have one that we didn't get to about whether Zelensky could get elected in the U.S., and we'll be sure to put that to her as well.
Yeah. We need more Jewish comedians running things, that's for sure.
I would love to hear Minnie's thoughts on JFK and Trump and all of that. But don't let me forget to mention The Puzzler and Profiles in Ignorance are both available for purchase and pre-order. Have to throw that out there one more time. And there are links in the chat box for you, of course. And as a reminder, we do have signed book plates from AJ. So get your order in ASAP if you would like one of those, limited number. Yes, but thank you both, Andy and AJ. I've had so much fun. I hope you guys did too. Any last words?
I would say, just want to say, I'll be AJ Jacobs for a moment and show my gratitude to RJ Julia. And I would say, if you're thinking of buying AJ's book or pre-ordering mine, do it at RJ Julia, because we need independent bookstores, and that's like a real hub of curiosity, independent bookstores. So I just want to make a pitch for your store. You're great. I've been to your store. I love it. And I hope that people, if they're thinking of buying one or both of these books, that they'll buy them from you.
I love it. I can't top that.